Is it? Friday? Who knows? Who cares? I really feel like we're getting to that point now at the end of the month. Just trying to turn this light on here because it's so dark. We're getting to that point towards the end of the month where, Christmas is around the corner and everybody's like, let's just get to Christmas. Let's just get to Christmas. And people kind of it's almost like people just stop. They're just like, I'm kind of done now. I've worked so hard for 360 days of the year. I just would really like to just start to slow down and stop. So who cares what day of the week it is, My favorite time is between Christmas Day and New Year's Day, when there's that weird time you don't really know what's happening. Can I park here? Did we have Christmas yet? Is the TV showing specials? It's more like that in England, to be honest. In America, life just goes back to normal because people work very hard here, much harder than in most places. We'll talk about that a bit later. Good morning. Welcome to Backchannel. I'm Anthony Davis. I'm in Los Angeles, California, just after 9 on the Pacific coast here. Carla's producing. She's in London currently, West Hampstead. Very nice, salubrious area, known for its celebrities, and Carla. And we're also going to work our way through the morning papers in just a moment, find out what's happening around the world. See, look, this ring light is now right in my eye. You're not going to enjoy that. Oh, look. It's like a computer game. I didn't go and get the new glasses. I was going to get the new glasses, and I ran out of time. I'm going to go today. They don't open until noon. It's very frustrating. Noon. Who opens at noon? I wouldn't mind if they stayed open till midnight. They close at 6. So, So the new glasses that come later. I'm in a coat. I'm wrapped up today. It's cold here. It's 54 degrees on the West Coast right now, which is pretty cold by my standards. But saying that, I've been in Cleveland, which was snowing. So I'm very confused about everything. I went out last night to see my brother, and I only had a little jacket, and I was like, I'm going to be freezing afterwards. And it was really warm last night. It's so confusing. Anyway, welcome to Backchannel. Welcome to the Anthony Davis Show. That's what it says. We're going to take a look at the morning papers and see how the country is shaping up. See how it's shaping up. And to get involved, just let me know what you want to say in the chat. You can send me a chat. Just remember to do your wake-up word, then the word "say," and then your message. Easy. You can also look at us on YouTube and comment there, and at backchannel.tv for your messages. Lots to look at this morning. We're going to be talking about the big stories, indeed. Which American city's been voted as one of the best in the world to visit in 2022? You might be surprised by the answer. Also, the worrying trend of online threats against journalists, as suffered by Dr. Michelle Ferrier. I'd also like to look at the threats towards Congresswomen, especially Congresswomen of color, because they're getting death threats at an increasing rate. And Kevin McCarthy, who is the leader of the Republican Party in Congress, has said nothing about it. Hasn't disciplined or anything, because he kind of likes it. Because deep inside, he's obviously a racist. Elle magazine says it'll ban fur from its publication, but why does fur continue to be controversial? We'll be looking at that and arguing, if it's still class war or a hypocritical debate. All opinions are welcome, and I look forward to hearing your take on that a little bit later. Also, new devices for Christmas, which can be hacked, apparently. So do you know how to protect your online privacy? Have you ever been hacked? And what are your tips to stay safe online? That coming up. And finally, we're going to take a look at the legendary African-American abolitionist Frederick Douglass. He published the first issue of his anti-slavery newspaper, North Star. We'll be looking at his life and the iconic publication, of course, because he published it on the 3rd of December, which is today, but in 1847. So that's 180 years ago. So lots to look at, lots to talk about, lots of stuff, but we're going to jump straight into the morning papers. The Los Angeles Times is first on the list of newspapers that we're going to jump straight into. And if you want to message me at any time during this, even with the name of a newspaper that you would like me to review that is not currently being reviewed by me because I'm reviewing a different newspaper, then you can do that too. And I will jump to think of me as your kind of British butler. You can be like, "Go fetch me the papers, Alfred." I'll be like, "Yes, sir, no problem, sir." Madam. Front page of the Los Angeles Times leads with a photograph of ice breaking up at the mouth of Convict Creek in the Sierra Nevada. I guess this is probably a climate change story. Yes, it is. Could decline 45% by 2050. This is a study by the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. Also, man held in Avant killing. Beverly Hills police on Thursday arrested a 29-year-old Los Angeles man in connection with the killing of Jacqueline Avant, a prominent philanthropist and wife of music legend Clarence Avant, as more details emerged about the shocking crime. We actually mentioned that yesterday, so it's kind of interesting to follow up on that. You know, we talked a little bit. It was in the newspapers yesterday. We kind of talked about that a little bit. Winter Tale, a snow state. Seasons with little or no snowpack could become increasingly common. Yeah, well, this is all... I mean, the people that kind of don't understand how climate change has already presented itself are kind of missing the point, aren't they? You know, it's already here. It's already happening. The change of climate, the weather system, the increased extreme weather, because it's not just like regular weather. It's extreme weather that climate change affects. So it's polar ice caps, yes, displacement of polar bears and similar, ice creatures, but it's also extreme weather, floods, tornadoes. These are the things, and they're just going to get worse. And so it's not like there's no evidence. You don't have to go digging around for it. You probably know somebody that lives in a state that is seeing extreme weather. And we have this in England, where I'm from, with flooding. It's just relentless. I'm amazed that they haven't got to the point yet where they just say, okay, we're moving out. We're just like closing this town down. And it'll end up being like Chernobyl, where you'll have entire towns and cities evacuated because extreme weather has been so regular and so prevalent that it's not worth rebuilding every time. It'd be like Chernobyl. It'd be like a nuclear wasteland where people just like got up and went. And maybe you live somewhere that is also subject to these types of extreme events. Or maybe you live somewhere like a ski resort where for tourism purposes you need people to come in and enjoy your snow. And maybe you don't have any snow anymore. Maybe climate change has changed the economics of your town or your city. And still people deny that it's a thing. Voters support right to shelter, leery of new taxes. Poll finds most see homelessness as fixable but doubt leadership. This is on the front of the Los Angeles Times for this Friday morning. It says Los Angeles County voters broadly support a legal right to shelter for all, but offer tepid backing for new taxes that might pay for it, a new poll finds. I've spoken to so many people about homelessness in Los Angeles, and they're all like blaming the government. They're like, it's the governor's fault. And these are Democrats complaining about a Democratic government. I can understand that frustration. But I also recognize that this is a mental health crisis, isn't it? And distributing mental health support is much harder than handing out food parcels, because it relies on people committing to therapy, to outreach programs, coming every day. It's a big project. US to resume migrant policy with court order. Asylum seekers will again have to wait in Mexico. Yes, it's interesting how a lot of the media have framed this as Biden restarting this Remain in Mexico policy, and it's actually not. It's a conservative judge in Arizona restarting this policy and saying Biden stopped it illegally. And so, of course, Biden is fighting it, but, there's a legal precedent for it. Migrants seeking to enter the United States will again have to stay in Mexico as they await immigration hearings, as the Biden administration reluctantly announced plans on Thursday to reinstate the Trump-era policy and agree to Mexico's conditions for resuming it. Revival of the Remain in Mexico policy comes even as the Biden administration maneuvers to end it in a way that withstands legal scrutiny. And a photograph of a whole bunch of US-bound migrants in Chiapas. Thousands of people. I hate that word caravan that they use. I really don't like that word I understand that caravan has a dual meaning. But I don't like the idea of caravan as a word to describe humans seeking asylum and being like in convoy together on foot, with children and pregnant mothers. And it's a bit like in England we had a prime minister who made a reference to a swarm of immigrants. Do you remember that, Carla? It was, I think it was David Cameron referred to a swarm of immigrants. And, you know, a swarm is a word that we describe locusts, you know, locusts in a plague. And so he got severely criticized for using that word swarm. And I feel similar about the word caravan. To me, it's been kind of hijacked by Donald Trump and this kind of right-wing movement to think of people as being some kind of unwanted mass. And we're talking about, you know, people... Sorry, Carla, I missed that. Dehumanizing, that's right. It's language that dehumanizes people because fundamentally we're all the same. And these people are not kind of, you know, a lot of Americans refer to people as illegals. It's another word that I don't like to use, illegals. But I'll be honest with you. If you understand the true meaning of asylum, seeking asylum, from the kind of International Court of Human Rights, the way that human rights describes seeking asylum, to seek asylum in another country, the first country that is going to offer you safe harbor and passage from the country that you have fled because of political unrest or something similar. You end up you realize the difference between seeking asylum and swarms of caravans and these dehumanizing words. We hear them all the time. Also on the front of the LA Times, how did Omicron variant originate? They're saying mutations probably incubated in a person with poorly controlled HIV. Oh, this is just great. So now the right wing are going to jump on this and blame homosexuals for this variant. That's what's going to happen. You know? I watched an interview with Donald Trump on a British TV channel called GB News, and I say news in inverted commas. I watched the entire interview with Nigel Farage, who's a kind of right-wing extremist in the UK, former party leader. And they said it was like an access all areas, no holes barred interview, and it wasn't anything of the sort. It was a tired, fat old Trump just repeating his same old extremist tropes about the election being stolen, and I was like, wow. Challenge him. Even the conservative-leaning Supreme Court wouldn't take up any of these cases to suggest that there was any election fraud. Even they were like, nah, we're not going to take that up. We'd lose. You know, the election was fair. Biden won by 7 million more votes, and yet he's still going on about it. And he still calls coronavirus the China virus. Still. It's like nothing has changed with that guy. You know exactly what you're going to get. And this interview was so badly conducted. He wasn't challenged on a single thing that he said. The lies were just like spewing out of his mouth. And this is the problem, you know, when you're that powerful as an individual, nobody challenges you, not just journalists, but like people in your immediate circle. So your friends and your family, they either drink from the same cup as you do, and therefore they have the same views, or if they disagree, they're never going to challenge you on it. They just won't. So you're surrounded by either yes men, family who obviously will side with you, and then employees who are compliant because they want to keep their jobs. So you actually never get any access to either the truth or you never even get questioned. Your views never get questioned. And sometimes I think, well, he just believes it. You know, he believes that the election was stolen. And then other times I'm like, he knows it wasn't stolen, but He's just a propagandist. It's interesting, isn't it? It's like two versions of reality. He has his reality because he operates and lives in that bubble, in that kind of sphere of propaganda. That's where he exists. So it says the Omicron variant, now present in at least 23 countries, was around the world, was probably incubated in the body of a person with an immune system battered by HIV or another immune-compromising condition that can cause a prolonged coronavirus infection, according to the South African scientists who detected fast-spreading genetic mutations. She says a lot, Tulio de Oliveira, doesn't she? Because she's been, she's said a few things recently that have since people have been like, or other scientists have been like, nah, that's not the case. I mean, she's saying a lot, and it's worrying because, we really need to stick to the science to qualify this stuff. Stacey, hi, thank you for joining us this morning in Texas. She says that's not the way people should be treated. Thank you. Yes, that's also in reference to the migrant, caravan as it's described, which I like to refer to as people seeking asylum for the right reasons. I mean, I watched a lot of interviews with people that were, in this group, and the men were just saying, well, we just need to find jobs. Like, we have family, we just need to find jobs. All it was, the whole thing was finding jobs. They're economic migrants, because their countries have been decimated by politics. And economics follows politics. And it's happening here as well. I mean, it's happening all over the world. But, the countries are so in debt now. There's so much debt propping up countries. We talked about the US debt the other day. What was it? Something like 27 trillion, the debt? We looked at the usdebtclock.org, and it was very interesting just to see the numbers ticking up in front of us. But, how is America called a rich country when it has $27 trillion worth of debt? I mean, who made that acceptable? Because I know that with me, if I'm in any debt, I don't think of myself as a wealthy person. I think of myself as someone in debt. It's all to do with, tricking the markets, I guess. The Merced Sun Star we're looking at now. Where is this newspaper from? Where is the Merced Sun Star from? What state is that? We're just having a look. It must be California because they're leading with a California story. CA Appeals Court deals a blow to high-speed rail opponents. It says judges on California's 3rd District Court of Appeal dealt another blow to the hopes of high-speed rail opponents in Kings County and elsewhere, issuing a ruling on Tuesday that the current use of bond funds for construction in the central San Joaquin Valley does not violate the California Constitution. Interesting. Yeah, they're trying to put these high-speed rail links in between Los Angeles and San Francisco, and, I mean, it's a good thing, isn't it, if you think about it? But people love to fly. People are addicted. I was telling somebody yesterday, because of my experience going to Cleveland, that Americans use domestic air travel like Brits use National Express coaches, buses. In every town, we have a National Express coach station. We call a bus a coach. And so people line up and they just climb on, and you don't have to show ID. It's just like, you just move people around the country, and it's very cheap to travel around the country on a National Express coach. As cheap as like £5. And so I think it's the same with domestic air travel in the US, because, if you think about the equivalency of the country, scale of the country, size of the country, a coach or a bus is not going to be able to make those journeys. And of course they have the Greyhound bus, but, you're going to spend like 5 days traveling if you want to cross country. So airports have become like bus stations. People come in, they don't have to show ID, you just go in because you're American, you go to a domestic terminal, you just line up, you get onto a plane and you go. And I love that. I mean, I think it's fascinating. We just don't have that in the UK. So it's very interesting to me to see the way people culturally have embraced flying. But of course, flying comes with so many more carbon emissions than riding on a train. You know, the train, I presume, will be electrified. So this lawsuit trying to kind of shut down this train, this build of this train, has failed, by the sounds of things. Biden lays out COVID-19 plan without lockdowns. It says with rising numbers of COVID-19 cases predicted this winter, President Joe Biden on Thursday appealed for Americans to get their booster and get behind his plan to tackle the new Omicron variant through wider availability of vaccines and shots, but without new major restrictions on daily life. Biden wants to require private insurers to cover the cost of at-home COVID-19 tests, and he's tightening testing requirements for people entering the United States regardless of their vaccination status. Also, Gavin Newsom urges COVID vaccines as Omicron variant hits California. He says he wasn't surprised about the confirmation of California's first case of Omicron, saying officials were able to identify the case due to the state's aggressive testing protocols. Yeah, we forget, don't we, that there are dozens and dozens and dozens of scientists sitting in laboratories with Petri dishes testing the tests that you and I go and have. When we go and have a COVID test and it goes off to a lab, it's not just telling us whether we're negative or positive. That's not the end of the line for that test. That test is then in a laboratory and it's being analyzed for various strains and it's being geotagged so they know exactly where that test took place and they know exactly the age of the person who was tested. And all of this data is creating and building up this picture of how COVID is evolving. And all this data is going back to the CDC and HHR and all of these other places. It's very interesting to me. We forget quite what goes on. Every time you go take a test, all of the data that is disappearing off the back of it. And you know, this is why I worry about these home tests that Biden is now putting out. They need to come with an app or something where you send the data. But, you know, I've done 6 of these home tests now, and it tells you within 15 minutes if you're positive or negative, but there's no way of then sending that data back to the laboratory. And I wish there was, because, you know, they need the data. Mandatory water cuts likely in 2022 amid drought here in California. It says with the drought showing no signs of abating, California officials announced on Wednesday they plan to deliver almost no water from the State Water Project to begin next year and suggested that mandatory cutbacks in urban usage could come if conditions stay dry. Okay, let's move on with the papers. What's next? Oh, the Aspen Times. That's Colorado, isn't it? I guess it is. Colorado, third state for Omicron as Pitco COVID rate declines. They're saying the variant officially arrived in Colorado on Thursday after state public health officials warned a positive test from Arapahoe County, a woman who'd recently traveled to South Africa. Yeah, I mean, it's like they're confirming now that South Africa is really the hotspot, as these cases that they test in the US, in both cases, the California guy, you know, the guy in San Francisco, and now this woman here in Colorado, you know, they've both come back from South Africa. Eagle County to seek court order, force a Basalt school to comply with mask mandate. Pastor at school says county ignores values and voices of parents. Yeah. Battle over individual rights versus public health during a pandemic is coming to a head. The roaring Fork Valley portion of Eagle County. It's Pastor Jim Tarr, the Cornerstone Christian Center and executive director of the related school, wasn't able to speak at the Board of Health meeting because no public comment was allowed. Well, that sounds free, open, fair, democratic. I just hate how This kind of Christian conservative movement has hijacked Christianity, hijacked freedom and liberty, hijacked all of these things, that we hold dear to our hearts, have been hijacked by an extreme group of religious leaders, in a way. People should be able to practice whatever they want to practice. But you can't allow religion to cross into politics. And, off the back of the Tea Party, I guess, now it's a thing, isn't it? It's a thing. We're going to Florida next for the Bradenton Herald. Florida lawmakers from both parties support marijuana reforms. Well, that's good. I actually said at the beginning of the COVID-19 outbreak that, all countries should legalize marijuana now. This is a really good time for everybody to get high. Just stay home and get high. Legally. Because going out and getting coronavirus is the alternative. So just stay home and get high. Have your fun. After years of partisan squabbling over the fate of Florida's medical marijuana program, Democrats and Republicans are coming together to push what they're calling a major reform bill. It could make it a lot harder for Floridians to get their hands on Delta-8 tetrahydrocannabinol products. Oh, THC. I could have just said THC. Tetrahydrocannabinol. Tetrahydrocannabinol. There you go. Tetrahydrocannabinol. Tetrahydrocannabinol. Those smokable and edible products have become part of the fast-growing market in Florida because of a loophole in the 2018 Farm Bill passed by Congress. Hemp products containing lots of Delta-8 aren't regulated like marijuana products heavy in the psychoactive Delta-9 THC compound, even though the compounds are extremely similar. Delta-9 produces the euphoric effect felt by users of medical and recreational marijuana. Well, marijuana is legal here in California. And I tried an edible recently, but I accidentally took 10 milligrams. And really my dosage should be 2.5 milligrams. And to say I had a psychedelic trip is an understatement. I was flying. My eyes were spinning in my head. I was flying and I was trying to cook. And I literally was like, it was fantastic. I had such a great time, but I did not know what was going on. I couldn't hear my own voice. My timeline, if I said something, I didn't know if I hadn't said it yet or if I'd said it yesterday. The whole timeline of my existence shunted. I was like, I'm saying things that I haven't said yet. And it's very interesting. I'm like, how do I know to say these things when I haven't said them yet? Kept going over and over in my head, this timeline of time just being reversed. It was like being in a Christopher Nolan movie. I was lost in the timeline of my own existence. And it's very interesting because, when you're in that state, I personally think about chronology, like the order in which time goes forward, tick, 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 second at a time. I think about that. That gives us all a stable sense of equilibrium. So like now it's nearly 9:30 Pacific, right? 12:30 Eastern. And when we look at the clock, it reassures us that is the time right now, and that is what we are doing. That is like where we are at in our day. I know there's been half an hour of this show so far, and in my mind I know that there's an hour and a half left, and I know where I'm sitting on the world, on the planet, on the globe, on Earth at this moment. And yet, the moment you take 10 milligrams of an edible, all of that goes out of the window. This concept of knowing where you are, when you are, why you are. It's incredible. If you're living in a city or town or country that has legalized marijuana, knock yourself out. Have as much fun as you want. Because when I lived in England, we would have to go to Amsterdam to have a smoke. Because that was the only country at the time in Europe that was where marijuana was legal. So we would have to get on a plane, go to Amsterdam for a couple of days. I went to Amsterdam for the first time to try to smoke marijuana. And I went with a girlfriend who was like a professional marijuana smoker. And she bought a whole bunch of joints for me and made me smoke them all. And I have no memory of how I got back to England. One minute I was in a hotel on the side of the river. I had 5 joints between my fingers like this. I think I did the whole lot once. And the next minute, I was back in England. I have no memory of the return journey. Don't remember getting on a plane. I don't remember getting to the airport. I don't remember getting back from the airport. I don't remember any of it. Just back home. Which is great, because who wants to remember transiting through airports? If you could forget that stuff. They should give you marijuana when you arrive at the airport, just so you don't have to remember any of the hell that you're about to go to for the next few hours. And then you won't mind if you take the middle seat. You'd be like, "Hi, what's your name?" It's very funny to me. Emily, thank you for joining us. Nice to know that you're around. Stacy says, yes, you should be allowed to practice what you want to practice. That's right, we were talking earlier about Christianity. And she said, that is why I don't do marijuana. Well, that is your choice. And, my mum smoked marijuana for my entire childhood. I had to deal with a permanently high mum. That's not fair. She wasn't permanently high, but she would have a smoke in the evenings. And the smell would come from under the door, Be like, are you having a smoke? She went, no. Me? No. Be like, yeah. You're literally wearing your pajamas on your head and socks on your hands. And you're carrying a potato masher. Very normal. Emily, thanks for joining us here on Backchannel. You can do the same. Just jump onto backchannel.tv if you want to chat with me, or you can talk to your Echo Show device. Just say the wake-up word followed by say, and then your message. And, of course, finally, YouTube is the place to go if you want to stream this show. Just, watch it, stream it, and do whatever. Just do whatever you like. We're heading to Indiana now, Post-Tribune. Gary Mayer tests positive. My friend is actually from Gary in Indiana. It's a kind of mining town. Well, it was a mining town. It's like a wasteland now. It says both Gary's mayor and deputy mayor announced on Wednesday they're experiencing breakthrough cases of COVID-19 with very mild symptoms. The mayor, Jerome Prince, said he received his diagnosis Sunday. He said, I was vaccinated earlier this year, and despite some mild symptoms, I feel well. Deputy Mayor Trent McCain said via phone interview he found out about his positive test on Wednesday after suffering some gastrointestinal symptoms on Monday. Also, schools boost pay to lure substitute teachers on the front of the Post-Tribune for Gary, Indiana. Schools, it was a struggle even before COVID, says one of the officials. Trying to recruit people is very difficult now in all sectors. So there's a photograph of a substitute teacher speaking to his students during a English as a second language class at Edison High School on Wednesday. And unfortunately, he's pulled his mask down below his nose for the photograph, which I don't think is setting a very good example. The guy sitting next to me on the airplane had his mask just below the nose. And I had 2 masks on, completely covering my face, right up to the eyeballs. And I just looked at him with my big, weird, squiffy eyes like this. I had a girlfriend once who, when I took my glasses off, she said to me, you've got boggly eyes. That relationship lasted about 6 weeks. But I looked at this guy and he knew what I was thinking. And so there was actually some space behind, so he got up and he moved, sat behind. So, I think it's very important, if you see something that you think is wrong, like someone not wearing their mask properly, you've got to say something. It's not a joke. You've got to say something. Which is fine in some countries. In America, there is always the fear that they're, open carrying a weapon. So it's probably good just to check if they're carrying a weapon before you criticize them for not wearing a mask. Because invariably, the people that are not wearing masks are also the people that like to carry weapons. Hobart Police Chief Zormier retires after 31 years in law enforcement. That's good. Wonder if they're going to replace him with another white man, or if they can find a black police chief. I mean, that would be very helpful, wouldn't it? Like all police forces around the country they have to replace white police chiefs with black police chiefs. Wouldn't that be good? And then maybe African Americans would not fear for their lives so much every time they get pulled over, because they'd be like from the very top. I mean, it could have a negative effect. There was a TV show called Erie, Indiana. I do not remember that. When was that? In the 80s or something. It sounds like an 80s show. Is it recent? 90s. I don't remember that. I didn't really watch television in the 90s, to be honest. I was too busy reading the news. Oh, like a horror sci-fi show. Interesting. For children. Poor kids. I used to watch... What shows did I watch back then? I used to like Cagney and Lacey. I don't know where that was set. Maybe Boston. Oh, I used to love ER. Talking of Boston, I loved ER. That was set in Boston, wasn't it? Yeah. In the West Country, in England, where the farmers live, they had their own version of that show. It was called OOR. City seeks missing middle housing on the front page of the Des Moines Register. It says, starting in January, Des Moines will waive property taxes on so-called new missing middle housing, smaller multifamily developments such as triplexes, townhomes and flats, to diversify the city's housing stock and provide affordable home options for renters and homeowners. Well, that's good. It's a very kind of progressive thing, isn't it, in Iowa? I asked my friends in Cleveland the other day if marijuana was legal in Cleveland, and they said it is for medicinal purposes. And I was like, oh, okay, so you all have those fake medical cards. They were like, yeah. Apparently the UK is the world's largest distributor of medicinal marijuana. I guess it's like a waypoint for it coming from Europe. But the problem with marijuana in the UK is it's really not very good stuff. Growing up, like my little brother would smoke relentlessly, and the stuff was disgusting. They called it skunk because it was just grim. Really there was no purity to it, because it was always cut with something because you just couldn't get it. That's the problem if you don't legalize it. People are going to smoke anyway, and they're just going to smoke this crap, and it's just going to make them ill. Midwestern rainfall slowly poisoning the Gulf of Mexico. It says located in the heart of America's breadbasket, Champaign County, Illinois, helps feed the nation's demand for corn and soybeans, while fueling one of the more insidious impacts of climate change, fertilizer runoff. Every year, farmers apply tons of nitrogen fertilizer to the vast swathes of crops that blanket Champaign's flat landscape. And as rain carries unused fertilizer into the nearby Spoon River, it spurs toxic algae growth downstream. So, there we are. That's interesting, isn't it? It's kind of a big story. Anything else here? Biden unveiling his new COVID-19 plan, which we've already read about. So, yeah, there we go. That's the Des Moines Register. We're whizzing through these. We're going to talk a little bit about this rainfall story a bit later. Is that all the newspapers? Did we get all the newspapers done that quickly? So we're going to find out which American city was named the best American city to live in just a few moments. But first we're going to hear the US News Update, which is the podcast that I do every day. It's just 2 minutes long, but it gives you a chance to find out what's happening right across the country, and you can download it wherever you get your podcasts from. Anyway, here it is. It's Friday, December 3. From the Volley Network, this is your daily US News Update. I'm Anthony Davis. The US House Senate voted last night to fund the government through mid-February, removing the risk of a partial shutdown. The vote came hours after the House of Representatives voted 221 to 212 to approve the stopgap funding bill, which runs through February 18. Only one Republican supported the measure. Meanwhile, a small group of hardline Republican senators put forward a proposal to defund Joe Biden's COVID-19 vaccine mandate for workers. It was not clear if those Republicans had the votes to pass their proposal in the narrowly Democratic-controlled chamber. Republican Senators Mike Lee, Ted Cruz, and Roger Marshall had earlier raised the possibility that the government could partially shut down over the weekend while the Senate moved slowly toward eventual passage. Meanwhile, Joe Biden on Thursday laid out his strategy to fight the coronavirus as the highly contagious Omicron spread across the globe, with winter coming and hours after the first known US case of community transmission of the variant was reported. With authorities around the world scrambling to contain Omicron, Biden warned in no uncertain terms that infections will rise this winter. So far, US states have found 3 Omicron cases in California, Colorado, and Minnesota. Your daily US News Update is part of the Volley Network. To hear my live daily morning show, ask your Amazon Echo speaker to open Backchannel. I'm back. Sorry, took a little longer. Got a lot of windows open here. Got to open a lot of windows. To make it work, you got to open a lot of windows, you know. So that was the US News Update. You can download that wherever you get your podcasts. So I also want to remind you that Volley's got a growing list of shows, including Haley and Allison Live. They wake you up in the morning with lots of laughs, and their one-star cinema review. Or Live Every Day with Liv Harrison. She's live from Texas, celebrating the little things in life with, Carla, plenty of coffee. Or what about the charming and funny Hal Rudnick and his mum Deborah, whose program Your Pal Hal directly follows this program at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. The Hal and Deborah Show. She's moonlighting on this show, Hal. You do realize that. Moonlighting. That was another show I used to love in the 90s. You love Moonlighting? Loved it. Bruce Willis. Loved it. So I was asking earlier, which is the one city that has been named one of the world's best places to visit? Not live, visit. You ready for this? I mean, I did ask earlier, and nobody's written in to suggest a place, despite having literally tens of people listening to this program right now. Nobody has come up with a suggestion so far. Literally tens of people. It's going to take Carla and I a while to compose ourselves after that moment of insanity / hilarity / truth. I'll give you a clue. The next newspaper I'm about to review is the Birmingham News. Christmas in Alabama, it says. Santa Claus is coming back to town. It said Oxford's LaFane Freeman is making his list and checking it twice. He's in his 64th year as Santa LaFane, and he's not slowing down. The 81-year-old first donned the classic red Santa Claus suit in 1957. As he's so popular, he's already booking appearances for 2022. You know why? Because he looks just like Santa Claus. This guy is the absolute spit. It's amazing. City named one of the world's best places to visit. That's unbelievable. I'm actually going to email that to my friend who lives in Birmingham, Alabama. Well, he's from there. Hang on. Here we go. Because, this really is something. This really is something. It's like a big deal. If you're from there or you live there, you're going to be like, this is a big deal. Incredible. Birmingham. Consider it sent. It says Condé Nast Traveler has named, it's a magazine, incidentally, has named the Magic City one of the best 22 places to go in 2022. Not just one of the best places to visit in the South or in the United States, one of the 22 places to visit in the world. The whole wide world. The magazine cited, you sure it didn't choose the wrong Birmingham? You sure it didn't choose Birmingham, England? And like it was a misprint. I mean, Birmingham, England is really not somewhere you want to spend too much time, I'll be honest. You can get a good curry there, but not a huge amount else. You spend a lot of time on freeways. Isn't Spaghetti Junction in Birmingham, England? I think Spaghetti Junction is somewhere in the Midlands, the Black Country. They call it the Black Country, incidentally, not for any racist purpose, but it's where the coal mines used to be, which is where people were covered in soot. But literally, the waste product from the mining would just be like everywhere, like coat the whole county. It says, fittingly, the world will come to Birmingham for the World Games in the summer of 2022. The Games take place July 7 to 17 at venues throughout the metro area. The magazine cited Birmingham's abundance of first-class restaurants and hotels, as well as its markets and green spaces. Other international destinations on Condé Nast Traveler's list, which was released on Wednesday, include Honduras, Istanbul, London, Malta, Serbia, I feel like I'm announcing the Eurovision Song Contest now, Sicily and Singapore, as well as Querétaro, Mexico, Rapa Nui, Chile, Kyushu, Japan, and Spain's Balearic Islands. In addition to Birmingham, the US destinations include Charleston, South Carolina, the state of West Virginia, and the Great Lakes region. Here's part of what Condé Nast Traveler writer Kelsey Ogletree had to say about Birmingham. He said, downtown Birmingham is feeling more revitalized than ever, as several historic buildings have been reimagined as restaurants by local chefs. Five-time James Beard finalist Rob McDaniel, who grew up 80 miles from the city, opened contemporary Southern Grill Helen in 2020 inside a 1920s shotgun-style building. You can smell his wood-fired meats from the sidewalk, and inside every meal starts with warm angel biscuits topped with whipped cane syrup butter. A block away at the Essentials, Southern-bred chef Victor King and pastry chef Kristen Hall have partnered with farmers to serve vegetable-heavy dishes, homemade pastas. Oh, this is making me so hungry! And tasty desserts. Delicious. Delicious. Do you know what I'd really like to do today? Because I didn't do it yesterday. Do you ever do this? I'd really like to eat well today. Do you know what I mean by that? Like, I just want to eat well today. I just want to spend a little bit more money on food today. Just like eat well. Because yesterday I just ate like leftovers and it was disgusting. I had milk that was gone bad. I had some cake, like pie left over from Thanksgiving that had gone bad, and I just put it all in my mouth. I ate some almonds that had fallen out in my bag while I was traveling to Cleveland, and I ate them from the bottom of the bag, covered in schmutz. I also had some Cheerios that had gone bad. They were soft, and I ate them with the milk that had gone bad. It was disgusting. My guts yesterday was like a dumpster. That's true, yeah. Carla says I'm a person of extremes. Because I bought a $30 lobster roll at the airport in Minneapolis on the way to Cleveland. And that's true. But that's because I just thought I had to, I deserved it. because I just put myself through this flight and I was like, I wanted to eat well. My friend in London, Michaela, when I told her I was going on a trip, she was like, well, at least you can look forward to the aeroplane food. I said, you're joking. There is no aeroplane food on domestic flights in the US. In the UK, wherever we travel, it's obviously abroad, so there's always a meal, like, included. Not on domestic flights in the US. You want to eat, you got to pay for a meal. You have to book it in advance, and they don't serve hot meals. You'll be lucky if you get a sandwich. Biscoff they were serving. Biscoff. 2 little coffee biscuits. Stacey says if you want a really good city to visit, you should visit Texas. Well, I would love to go to Texas, actually. I've never been. I'd like to go to Austin, because I think that's probably the least racist section of Texas. I think that's like the most inclusive. I don't really want to go anywhere that's racist anymore. I'm done with these places. But Austin, I'm told, is very integrated, very cosmopolitan, amazing food, amazing hospitality, amazing drink. But recommend other places and I'll go. Oh, San Antonio is also... Is San Antonio like a little like Austin in that way? Oh, there's a river walk there. We should do the San Antonio Express this morning. We haven't done it yet. We'll do that for you, Stacey. Oh, I should have it. Okay. I'll have a look here. I'm sure I do. There it is. Thank you so much, Carly. You're so ahead of the game. Whereas I'm merely on the game. San Antonio Express news leads with Remain in Mexico policy is returning. Decision follows a court ruling and talks with Mexico. Yes, migrants seeking to enter the US will again have to stay in Mexico as they await immigration hearings, as the Biden administration reluctantly announced plans on Thursday to reinstate the Trump-era policy and agreed to Mexico's conditions for resuming it. Revival of the Remain in Mexico policy comes even as the administration maneuvers to end it in a way that survives legal scrutiny. President Joe Biden scrapped the policy, but a lawsuit by Texas and Missouri forced him to put it back into effect, subject to Mexico's acceptance. I mean, do you think that it was forced to return for racist and xenophobic reasons, or because they genuinely feel like the border is at breaking point? Is there a difference there? Because it was a conservative judge who was installed by Trump, because, Trump put in these very inexperienced and conservative judges all over the country. And so this is one of these judges in Amarillo. So obviously the judge is going to have a bias and has found a kind of reason to reinstate this policy. But my feeling is that with all the rhetoric that Trump gave us, saying that, Mexicans were rapists and criminals, and, I just think anybody who is like a follower of that ethos is just going to be like, well, let's just do anything we can to make life as difficult as possible for these people. But, that means that we are now living in an uncivilized country. A civilized country is a country that allows political and economic asylum. That's what a civilized country is, that signs up to this human rights construct where people can come because they are seeking asylum, because they are escaping the grievance of the country that they were born into. And in Europe, they have this rule that you have to seek asylum in the first country that you visit that has, opportunity. So this is why there's a lot of controversy about all of these migrants that are stacked up in France and crossing the English Channel in boats to get to the UK, because the UK is a very generous welfare state system, so people can sign up for benefits. And so word has spread around Europe about this, because France doesn't have the same, which is why there's such a huge, unhoused population in France, because they have very temporary welfare. So there's all this criticism of European migrants because they're saying, well, they should be stopping in Germany, which is often their first port of call. But Germany has got too many now. Germany has been overly generous. So you end up with this kind of, mismatch of, and people don't want to be in Germany. Some people want to kind of keep going to the UK. And I don't blame them. I honestly don't blame them, because the UK is a very tolerant place in some parts of the UK. Not in all. In some parts of the UK, it's a very xenophobic, racist, ignorant place. But you can't tarnish an entire country with the same brush. It's the same with America. America is not one big country full of all people thinking the same. In fact, it's more divisive than ever. And it's not just two. It's not just like a political split, because I think that politics is very nuanced. And so some people might, you might be a Republican, but you might think that people should be able to seek political asylum. Or you might not want abortion to be banned and still be a Republican. You might be just a fiscal conservative who believes in small government. That argument is flawed these days, by the way. The government is the government, whatever happens. It doesn't matter who comes in, admittedly, Trump did hole out most of the departments. He just didn't employ anybody to work in. For those of us that were waiting for our immigration papers during the Trump years, forget it. He had nobody working in that department. Also on the front of the San Antonio Express News, site for internet security to launch. A partnership between the city of San Antonio and CPS Energy is on the verge of opening a $4.2 million center to protect the region from cybersecurity threats. Interesting. Fighting back against isolation and anxiety amid pandemic, people have to make changes as they try to adjust to a new normal. When the COVID-19 pandemic arrived, working mum Kelly Cardenas was initially thankful for the break. She and her husband frequently traveled for their jobs, so the shutdown allowed them to spend more time at their San Antonio home with their 4 children. But as the months dragged on, she began to feel isolated. She said, "It really hit me when it was going to be a while." She's a senior training consultant at a financial firm. "And I didn't know that it would ever be the same, and that really got me down. As time went on, things weren't really getting back to normal. It really scared me." Yes, people have to make changes as they try to adjust to a new normal, is the headline now. City Council puts a hold on annexation of 440 acres. This is a delayed move to annex about 440 acres of land in the south and east sides, while officials work with 2 brothers who don't want their farmland within city limits. The City Council will consider the proposed additions again at its December 16 meeting. So many screens. Let me just try and find out. I'm trying to do everything on this screen. Oh, Nikita is with us. Hi, Nikita. Stacy says they don't get the concept of what an easy life is. Well, ain't that the truth? So there you go, Stacy. There's your San Antonio Express News, an exclusive paper review just for you, because that's what we do here. We offer a bespoke service for anybody who wants their newspaper reviewed and discussed, analysed. Then you just tell me which paper. That's how we do it. So we're going to talk about death threats. These First Amendment advocates struggling to say what's a crime and what's protected. Social media policies compromising the safety of journalists. That's right. Death threats are surging against public figures and officials. And First Amendment advocates are struggling to draw the line between true threats and protected speech. And, this is something I've talked about a lot. Like, how do we qualify in America the difference between free speech and hate speech? And in other countries, certainly where I'm from, it's obvious, right? It's obvious. It's common sense, the difference between free speech and hate speech. And in England, we have all these laws against hate speech. So if you commit a hate speech crime, you will be prosecuted, fined, and potentially imprisoned. Not so in America. In America, free speech is everything. And it can include hate speech, like calling Mexicans rapists and criminals. And that came from the former president. So, under British law, if somebody had called these migrants, these economic migrants, rapists and criminals, they would probably have a case against them. They'd be arrested, certainly. And in America, it's okay for the president to say it. And you wonder why the country is so divided. You wonder why there is, Ilhan Omar, who has been on the TV a lot recently because she's had so many death threats, including xenophobia from members of Congress, from other lawmakers. In this case, in particular, 2 Republican lawmakers, females, going for her, saying that she's a suicide bomber with a backpack. That's hate speech. It's common sense that that's hate speech. And in Europe, that would be an arrestable crime. And a lawmaker would not be protected with parliamentary privilege from a hate crime. They just wouldn't. Common sense, because, we still value decency, and there is still a barometer for what is morally and ethically right. But in other countries, like America, and I'm sure Brazil's probably like this as well, with Bolsonaro in charge, there is no barometer for when free speech becomes hate speech. It's just all considered to be, well, that's your opinion. So we're living in a world now where, and this is only going to get worse, it's not going to get better. They're not suddenly going to change the rules and go, okay, well, from now on, hate speech is banned. They're just not. It goes against the American sense of freedom and liberty. You can't tell me what to say. You can't tell me whether I should be vaccinated or not. You can't tell me if I should be able to carry a gun or not. These things run very deep. And so they're baked into the culture. And if you want to change anything like this, it would take at least a decade or 2 of daily, constant pressure, reminders, relearning, re-evaluating your muscle memory for being a natural proponent of hate speech and thinking it's free speech. Anyway, we're going to look at this together. Dr. Michelle Ferrier, who's a PhD, she has experienced hate speech and a death threat in this way. And it's very worrying, isn't it? Because death threats are now surging, and First Amendment advocates are struggling to differentiate between what's a crime and what is protected. Protect free speech. I get that. I recognize that. But Michelle Ferrier was the first black columnist at the Daytona Beach News Journal. And she wasn't shocked by hateful calls, emails, and letters. She simply placed them in her red folder. But one persistent correspondent got her attention with vile manifestos full of slurs, of a race war, and a warning that said, "I'm coming for you." How do you qualify when a death threat needs to be taken so seriously? Because it's like people are very able just to kind of spew language out of their mouths, aren't they? But then they rarely see these threats through. But how do you know? How do you navigate the legal system with threats? It's a very interesting concept, isn't it? Unfortunately, the article in the USA Today that I'm quoting for it has a paywall, so I'm not actually able to kind of read it in full, which is a shame because it's a good story. But there's a lot of coverage. So she set up this thing called Trollbusters. It says, "We are Team Trollbusters. When you spot online violence, online abuse, or other troll behavior, send an SOS and we'll be your first responders online, supporting you with personal endorsements, just-in-time coaching, and reputation repair services. The trolls don't have to win. We have your back. A bit like Ghostbusters, isn't it? So, yeah, Michelle Ferrier, the founder of Trollbusters, troll-busters.com, says, I've been right where you are right now. As a former journalist and columnist, I receive hate mail and death threats for writing my lifestyle column in the local paper. Here's a sample of what I would regularly receive during my years as a columnist. This has just reminded me, actually. I actually got some threatening letters years ago when I was on the radio. And they were written by hand and written in a very weird, scrawly, serial killer style writing. And I asked my boss, what I should do about this. Should I go to the police? And they just said, nah, don't worry about it. Very, very responsible, very responsible. Stacey has to go. Stacey, have a great day. Enjoy your bath. Say hi to your mum for me. Thanks for spending your morning with us. Hopefully you enjoyed it and you got something out of it and all that stuff. Well, where's Deborah today? Is she a no-show? Very disappointed to know that was the case. It's me here pouring my heart out. Your pal Deborah. Where's your pal Deborah this morning? Would love to know. Deborah's definitely going to get her own show, isn't she? Let's be honest. Your pal Deborah. Perfect. Or maybe like a double act with Hal. So we've been discussing this morning the difference between hate speech and free speech and how the two are intrinsically linked, and who is the decider, who kind of is the barometer for which is hate speech and which is free speech. And I feel like we're at a crossroads now where, unless these are clearly defined by lawmakers, where lawmakers actually list all the phrases and the associated words and the types of things that are constituted hate speech and are illegal, then this will forever be considered just part of the vernacular. And this is why Kevin McCarthy saying nothing about these threats from other Republican lawmakers towards Ilhan Omar is such a kind of such a moment. It really, the future hinges on him coming out and really condemning this kind of language, and yet he's done none of it. And I don't like to tar all people with the same brush. I'm not prejudiced in any way, but the more I hear from Republicans on this subject, the more it makes me think that that entire movement are all racist. And I don't want to think that. I don't think people are bad. But I also think that they don't think racism is bad. I honestly think that we're talking about people who don't realize that racism is bad. So how do we get around that? How do we because I know racism is bad, because I feel well read, and I feel like I've discussed it with people of color, and they've described to me what it's like to live and grow up in America as a black man or as a black woman. But I am certain that there are people on the right who just don't have empathy for this, and they don't think racism is really that bad. They're like, get over yourself. And those are the people that are perpetrating these criticisms and using this language and claiming that Ilhan Omar is, a suicide bomber because of a backpack, color of her skin, and the fact that she wears a headdress. How did we become like this? Like savages? When did we start to think it was okay to say these things out loud? Because my concern is that, the lawmaker, the Republican lawmaker that said this stuff about Ilhan Omar, she didn't do it anonymously. She did it she said it in a speech. And the speech was filmed and it went online. Did she think she was saying it in secret amongst fellow racists and it was okay to say this stuff because, we're all the same? Did she not think that it would get leaked? And that's my greatest concern about all of this. I actually feel that racists, for the 8 years of the Obama administration, they just hid. They didn't go away. They didn't stop being racist. They just put their hoods in the drawer. And then when Trump came along, they got their hoods back out of the drawer and they were given license to be free with their racist hate speech again. Because he was referring to shithole countries and, all of this stuff. Do you remember what Trump said? It came out of his mouth in a cabinet meeting. He didn't even hide it. He didn't even do it in a private place, or say it in secret and it got leaked. He actually said it at a cabinet meeting that was being filmed. So the point that I'm making, I just can't believe he said it. The point that I'm making is that they're not hiding their feelings anymore, these people. These types of things used to take place in the shadows, and they don't anymore. They've become mainstream. So how do you measure what is hate speech when half the country is saying it freely? And if you were to say anything at this late stage, what would they say in return? We've been cancelled. That's what they'll say. We've been cancelled. You hear it all the time. If a Republican lawmaker is being interviewed about a similar subject, they'll say, oh, well, people are just trying to cancel us. I'm like, yeah. We're just trying to cancel hate speech. That's all. We're trying to cancel you. But if you want to spew hate speech, then be cancelled. It's your hate speech that's being cancelled, not you as an individual, you idiot. So, let's just... I think we have something in common, all of us, and that is hopefully we want to live in a better world, a more... just a kinder world, where people are not at each other's throats, and people are not aggressive, and people are not angry all the time, and people don't feel the need to kind of carry their guns, their AR-15s into Black Lives Matter protests and claim to want to help. That is not the definition of wanting to help. Oh, but I was carrying a medical kit. Yeah. It was a lot smaller than the gun. So here we are, in this new kind of crazy universe. And I was thinking, I read an article this morning about women in society, in American society, having such a bad deal, how underrepresented women are. Only 25% of lawmakers in the United States are female. Just 25%. In Europe, the average is around 40%. So women are almost equally represented, or as represented as men, in European parliaments. But in the US, it's less than 25%. And it's the same with CEO positions, like jobs for women in the boardroom. Less than 5% of companies are run by women in America. Whereas in Europe, it's like nearly half. So we're constantly telling ourselves that it's the best country in the world, and yet other countries are just racing ahead with these modern concepts of allowing men and women to be equal, black and white people to be equal, black and brown people, brown and white people to be equal. And America's being left behind in so many ways. And so when you get death threats now, when people are receiving death threats, surging against public figures and officials, and First Amendment advocates are struggling to draw the line between true threats and protected speech, and conflicting court rulings mean that fewer cases are prosecuted and victims must fend for themselves. And we were talking about Michelle Ferrier, the first black columnist at the Daytona Beach News Journal, shocked by hateful calls and emails and letters. And she simply placed them in her red folder, but one persistent correspondent got her attention with vile manifestos full of slurs, predictions of race war, and a warning, "I'm coming for you." She said when you receive a threat like that, it's like a bomb dropping on your house. You don't know who to trust or who to turn to. She went to the police, but they'd neither the manpower nor the technical savvy to track down an anonymous perpetrator. The letters got more menacing. Ferrier said she grew so fearful that she self-censored her columns, hoping to tamp down the hate. She stopped going out in public. She guarded her children. And by the 10th letter, she told her boss she was quitting, moving the family and changing careers. She became a university professor and later executive director of the Media Innovation Collaboratory in Tallahassee, Florida. And then she went on to found Trollbusters, training and assisting journalists victimized by online harassment. Do you know how many people I've had to block on Twitter, on my personal Twitter? Do you know how many people I've blocked? I'll check for the latest figure, but it's a lot. Because, whenever somebody messages me hate speech or criticism that is unjust or is just vile, or, a lot of people are, I just block them. I don't engage with people. I don't try and talk people round. I just don't waste any time in that area. I've blocked over 850 people. And I've been on Twitter about 12 years. It's just so sad. I don't want to block people. I want everybody to have their right to, make their own argument. And of course, if someone's got a cohesive argument, then go for it. But if you're going to be hateful or abusive, critical, unnecessarily vile or hateful, then you get blocked. Immediately, I don't even think about it. Just my muscle memory just takes care of it. Block. I was looking at a tweet that I did on the 6th of January, the day of the insurrection. It got over 3.5 million impressions on Twitter. A solitary tweet on the 6th of January. That was my most successful tweet. And I hate to say that because I didn't want the 6th of January to be the day that happened, because obviously that was the day that a coup was staged against the United States government. And, I don't want to be part of a coup, but I was actually effectively part of the resistance because I tweeted a picture of the police allowing the protesters through the barricades because they just didn't have the manpower. Why didn't they have the manpower? Where was the support, the National Guard, the additional kind of people that were supposed to protect the Capitol that day when they knew that there was a huge rally going on? Somebody made sure they were understaffed that day. Just a hunch. Somebody knew. So, just talking about this kind of hate speech versus free speech, it's a legal quagmire, said Ferrier. They do not have the freedom of speech to say, "I'm going to kill you." And that's really the difference between free speech and hate speech, isn't it? Where the subject matter itself is so risky, offensive, and hateful that it shouldn't be allowed to come under the banner of free speech. But my concern is that here in the US, nobody wants to be the one to make that decision, what is free speech and hate speech. Whereas in Europe, it's just common sense. You just know the difference because of your common sense. I was talking to somebody yesterday, just dancing along to the tunes. I was talking to somebody yesterday and I was saying, because Backchannel is a brand new platform that we're kind of testing and pioneering and all this stuff, And I said that, sometimes there's nobody in the chat room to talk back to. And they said, well, why do you have to keep talking if there's nobody there? And I was like, well, because that's what you do. Alex, thank you for joining us. And they said, well, why don't you just wait for the next person? And I was like, that's a really good idea. I'll just wait. Don't you think that's a really good idea? Why just keep talking? Just wait for the next person to show up. Alex, thank you for joining us. Nice to know that you're part of the show here on Backchannel. It's 20 past 10 Pacific. It's 20 past 1 Eastern. This is the Anthony Davis Show, as it says. Does it say it? Yeah, it does. It says it right there. And we're discussing, lots of things this morning. The difference between hate speech and free speech. We've been looking through the morning papers. We've been talking a lot, actually, about, this kind of concept of living in an equal society. And I was talking about how women are underrepresented in Parliament, in Congress. Just less than 25% of lawmakers are female versus the average of over 40% in Europe. And I'm sorry I keep comparing things to Europe all the time, but, it's a similar landmass, and it's also the Western world, and it's also a developed nation, and it's also, wealthy, and so it has many equivalents to the US. I mean, where else is an equivalent to the US, if not Europe? And it's important to contrast and compare. We can't, otherwise we end up living in isolation. And arguably that's how American exceptionalism came about, because we just live in this echo chamber of America is the greatest, and we never turn around and see how other nations have evolved on their own. And this is why I really liked Michael Moore's documentary called Where to Invade Next. Do you remember that one? And he basically went around the world looking at education and healthcare and all of these kind of important issues to see which countries did it better than America, so that we could. The kind of irony of it was, let's invade those countries next, so that we can either steal those ideas or just eradicate them, so nobody compares America with Sweden or, France or whatever it may be. Where to Invade Next. It's a very good documentary. I do struggle with the titles of his documentaries. like Fahrenheit 9/11 I never really got. And then Fahrenheit 11/9, which I saw, I never really got. I just was like, and he knows, he's from Flint, Michigan, isn't he? Where there's this water crisis, and he's been campaigning to try and get clean drinking water for the people of Flint. And he made a documentary about that recently as well. He is a wonderful man. But isn't it sad that you can only really count the activist filmmakers on one finger? It's a bit like scientists. How many scientists can you name? American scientists. The answer? 1. Dr. Anthony Fauci. He's the only person that people know the name of. And yet Bill Nye doesn't count. He's like a TV star. He's a pretend scientist with a fake bow tie. He just dresses up like a scientist. And yet Fauci is considered by half the country to be the most hated man on the planet. They want him arrested for crimes against humanity. The guy who's devoted his life to trying to make the world a better place, practically cured the AIDS virus in Africa. So we can't name activists apart from Michael Moore. We can't name, filmmaker activists. We can't name scientists apart from Dr. Anthony Fauci. Where are our... Why are these subjects not sexy enough for us? Yet when it comes to naming celebrities or movie stars, even painters, people probably name half a dozen famous painters, the obvious ones. But, there's so much art out there that is being overlooked and ignored because people don't care to recall, but they'll be able to remember which episode of Keeping Up with the Kardashians when something happened, and they can name all of the characters. I personally prefer the Real Housewives of Atlanta, given the choice. And this is really my point. It's like, when did we become a society that is so obsessed with celebrity culture, yet we don't care much for education? We don't talk about the great educators, the great lecturers, the people in universities that are really inspiring people to think, philosophers. Really, and I'm talking about myself here, I'm not criticizing you, I'm talking about myself. Like, we have this incredible ability to recall useless information. And this a little bit goes back to when I stood up on the aeroplane yesterday and I saw people scrolling on their Instagram. The moment they got a signal, they started scrolling on their Instagram, and everybody was like looking for the same nothing. Just filling time, they were. So if you're interested, we're going to talk about one of America's great activists in just a few minutes, in 4 minutes to be precise. We'll do a US news update at like 28, and we'll do it at 30. Oh, we also did talk about fur, yes. Oh, I love a bit of fake fur. Can't tell the difference. You can't tell the difference. Why anybody is still wearing real fur, I have no idea. But, I do want to talk about this. So let's get into it, because it's a good subject. So Elle magazine says it will ban fur from its publications worldwide. This is the lifestyle and fashion magazine Elle. It announced on Thursday that it's banning fur from all pages of its publication in a move to support animal welfare and reflect changing tastes. They say it's a really great opportunity to increase awareness for animal welfare, bolster the demand for sustainable and innovative alternatives, and foster a more humane fashion industry. The magazine's 45 global editions each signed a charter to ban content that will promote animal fur on its printed, online, and social media pages. So far, 13 editions have implemented the charter. 20 more will do so starting in January. The remaining editions will apply the charter starting 1st of January 2023. Why wait a year? What are you waiting for? If you believe in it, go for it. So, this debate over long-lasting fur versus, cheaply made faux fur is nothing new. If you watch the classic 1998 Friends episode, the one with the Yeti, in which Phoebe inherits a mink, "Why would my mother send me a fur?" she laments. "I have a perfectly fine coat that no innocent animals suffered to make." Chandler, deadpan, says, "Just some 9-year-old Filipino kids who work their fingers bloody for 20 cents an hour." The audience laughs. And that's the point, isn't it? The hypocrisy in clothing. And in fact, there's a very interesting article I read yesterday about the fashion industry and how, the carbon footprint of fashion is just so vast and unnecessary. But beyond that, when you talk about animal welfare, and I have very early memories in London of the anti-fur brigade just really taking it out on shops that sold fur. I remember daubing the doors and windows in paint and stuff. So I have early memories of this. And my grandmother wore a mink coat, because in the 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s, that was what you wore, because it was a sign of status. It was horrific. Moth-eaten old thing. When she died, I relished throwing that thing away. But it's very interesting, isn't it, that I own leather shoes and I don't really think of leather as being a problem because it's a cow. And I think cows are farmed, is it a cow that was just, its meat was taken for food and therefore its coat was used for shoes. And is that such a bad thing? Because you're going to take the meat anyway. Now, I don't eat meat, but not for animal welfare. I don't eat meat for heart health. That's my choice. But have you tried plastic shoes? They're terrible. You know, shoes have been made in leather. They were actually one of the very earliest things ever made by humans, were leather shoes. If you go into museums, you'll see shoes from tens of thousands of years ago, made of leather. And they still survive. The plastic shoes from tens of thousands of years ago, they've all biodegraded. That's a joke. They didn't have plastic all those years ago. It's just a joke. So according to animal rights philosophers, eating meat is no more justified than wearing fur. Even Peter Singer, whose book Animal Liberation launched the modern animal rights movement, he wrote that it's hypocritical to protest against the fur trade while most people eat animals daily. In practice, however, fur is an easy target because relatively few people wear it, and fur apparel is expensive because much of the work is done by hand, which is, makes it easy to dismiss as an unnecessary luxury. But why is fur so controversial? Why should it matter? And with fur now so prominent on the designer catwalks, in fashion magazines and on the street, many publications are hosting debates about the ethics of wearing this much maligned material. But my view, personally, is that if the fur is fake, then you wear as much of it as you like. Because they're coming now to a point where fake stuff is indistinguishable from the real thing. And they've done it with burgers. I had a burger at the airport in Minneapolis. It was made of pea protein, Beyond Meat burger. It was completely delicious. Looked like meat, tasted like meat, didn't make me feel ill afterwards like meat does. And it was as expensive. I mean, it wasn't cheap. And yet, I don't want to stop enjoying a burger, but if I can do it in a sustainable, vegetable-based way, then why not? And I do understand that the problem with doing cheap cheap clothes, like replacing clothes with cheap fake alternatives, is that invariably it is low-cost child labor in places like Manila that is making these things, or Vietnam that is making these things. And if you go to, I want to use like H&M as an example, because they, famously sell these types of clothes, and they're often made in Vietnam. And, it's down to the manufacturer. It's down to the manufacturer to make it clear, a bit like Apple's trying to do with Foxconn and these using slave labor to make expensive luxury products. It's down to the manufacturer to have a policy on sustainability and on labor, and a bit like fair trade coffee. And so, we really need to look into every retailer's policies, don't we? We need to take it upon ourselves to actually just do more than look at the catalog. We actually need to go into the about section, or the sustainability section, or the manufacturing section, and then make a judgment call. I mean, I choose to only buy my clothes from one store, a Japanese clothing store. They're one of the biggest retailers in Japan, and because their stuff is cheap, and everything I'm wearing is from there now. And I probably could make more effort to look at their policy on labor. I could do more, and in fact I will. Today, after this, I will go and I will look it up, and I will make an effort to do that. And if I see that it is, they're never going to admit to being, you have to rely on investigative journalists to expose this stuff. This is what happened at Foxconn in China. with, makers of Samsung phones and Apple phones. They found the working conditions were so poor that workers were committing suicide because they just couldn't do another 15-hour shift. And so Apple went out of their way to make changes to this production process. I didn't hear Samsung say anything about it, but, at least Apple recognizes that it's not good enough. And Apple actually moved production of the Mac Pro to the United States. But the problem is the United States is not set up to manufacture on the scale that China is. China's got 1 billion people there. They can do this stuff. And yet here in the West we consume these things at such a rate. Angel, thank you for joining us. Nice to know you're with us. If you want a message, just use your wake-up word, then say, then your message. And if you want to go on the the Backchannel chat facility, then just go to backchannel.tv. Carla's best friend was called Angel. She lived in Ohio. Angel's a lovely name, isn't it? I mean, my daughter's middle name is Grace, and I see like Angel and Grace on that same spectrum of kind of ethereal names, right? So welcome, Angel. And if you want to watch the stream and see my angelic face, then you just go to YouTube and search Anthony Davis Backchannel. So we've been asking, should fur be illegal? And why is it so controversial? And why should it matter if we have fake fur now? And, is it okay to wear leather shoes even if leather is taken from a cow's hind? It's interesting how cows, I think a lot of it comes down to endangered species, right? Doesn't it? Because minks were endangered. The stole was endangered. And obviously, like a tiger skin is considered to be the most unacceptable. And yet, Don Trump Jr. is very happy to go and pose with a tiger that he's just killed whilst on safari. You do know that, like, there is a whole group of people on the right politically who keep endangered species at home. They actually buy tigers and they keep them at home. And they have trophies from hunts and kills, all considered to be illegal. And this is a huge thing. I actually learned about it first when I was watching The Tiger King, which is now in its 2nd season. Have you seen that show on Netflix, The Tiger King? And it turned out there's this whole illegal trade of people keeping animals, endangered animals, but also dangerous animals like tigers, keeping them at home. And it's huge in America, in the South especially. It's considered a status symbol. Come round and see my tiger. I mean, my racist landlord has a kangaroo and an ostrich. Yeah. I swear. And a llama in his house. Chickens and a cockatoo and a macaw flying around the house. The kangaroo actually died a couple of months ago. Just died. And he was very sad. You know what the first thing he did was? What did he do? The very same day. Took it to the taxidermist. To get it stuffed. I mean, and he's very much on the right politically, and to him these things are completely normal. To own a kangaroo. Keep it in a little cage, tiny little cage. The ostrich, tiny little cage. They're status symbols. And we forget that people live like this. To them it's very normal. And so the argument about not wanting to cage animals that should be living in the wild and not wanting to wear their fur and get vaccinated, because of course he won't. Even with a new variant, he won't. They just don't like to be told what to do. They want to do what they want to do. And you know, I can't argue with that. It's none of my business, you know? It's none of my business. Let's take a couple of minutes to listen to the US News Update. It is the latest news for today going on around the world. You can download it as a podcast. It's called US News Update. Here it is. It's Friday, December 3. From the Volley Network, this is your daily US News Update. I'm Anthony Davis. The US House Senate voted last night to fund the government through mid-February, removing the risk of a partial shutdown. The vote came hours after the House of Representatives voted 221 to 212 to approve the stopgap funding bill, which runs through February 18. Only one Republican supported the measure. Meanwhile, a small group of hardline Republican senators put forward a proposal to defund Joe Biden's COVID-19 vaccine mandate for workers. It was not clear if those Republicans had the votes to pass their proposal in the narrowly Democratic-controlled chamber. Republican Senators Mike Lee, Ted Cruz, and Roger Marshall had earlier raised the possibility that the government could partially shut down over the weekend while the Senate moved slowly toward eventual passage. Meanwhile, Joe Biden on Thursday laid out his strategy to fight the coronavirus as the highly contagious Omicron spread across the globe, with winter coming and hours first known U.S. case of community transmission of the variant was reported. With authorities around the world scrambling to contain Omicron, Biden warned in no uncertain terms that infections will rise this winter. So far, U.S. states have found 3 Omicron cases in California, Colorado, and Minnesota. Your daily US News Update is part of the Volley Network. To hear my live daily morning show, ask your Amazon Echo speaker to open Backchannel. There it is, the sweet sound of the US News Update, which is available to you as a podcast to download whenever you fancy. Just get it wherever you get your podcasts. It's 10:42 Pacific, 12:42 Eastern. And this is, 1:42 Eastern, I apologize. And this is Backchannel. I'm Anthony Davis. This is the Anthony Davis Show. And your pal Hal will be here at 11 o'clock or 2 o'clock Eastern. So stick around for him. Lots to look forward to. And in the last few minutes of the show, we've been talking about the fur trade and if fur should be illegal. But I also want to talk to you about this great abolitionist, Frederick Douglass. He published on this day in 1847 the first issue of his newspaper North Star. He was born in 1818 in Talbot County, Maryland. He died at the age of 77 in 1895 of a heart attack. He was the leader of the abolitionist movement. Sorry, I'm a little high this morning. Movement in the American Northeast, most famous for its oratory and writing. Born into slavery in Maryland, Douglass escaped north in 1838 and became involved in the anti-slavery movement there. And in 1847, he published the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, an American slave, a bestseller at the time and still considered among the most influential personal accounts of slavery. And then he went on to abolish newspapers, He was an abolitionist, but he did some publishing as well. Yes, he published the abolitionist newspapers, including the famous North Star, and was appointed to many public offices by the government, including President Lincoln. And he also actively supported women's suffrage, held public offices, and was a firm believer in the equality of all people. And, I find it very interesting that we think it's a modern construct to think of equality and, slavery being a bad thing. But it's not a modern thing at all. There were people hundreds of years ago who couldn't understand why women weren't as equal as men in the workplace. You know, there has always been people who are more progressive thinkers. I really don't understand when I see women campaigning to abolish abortion. I just, you know, I know that there's a religious connotation to it, but I don't believe that they believe in it. I feel like it's become a cult. They're just in the cult with the men. And I'm sure it's the same with slavery as well. There's plenty of people these days who don't actually think that slavery was a bad thing. You know, they've rewritten history. They have excuses. And I've seen them interviewed. People will say, this is white people, many of them in the South, who will say, well, you know, without slavery, these black people wouldn't have had jobs. They say that. So really, and they say, and one of the interviews I saw was a family talking, and this was on this Gary Young show. Gary Young is a British journalist, a black man, who went and did an investigative documentary that is on Netflix, I think, or actually might be on Amazon Prime, about racism in America. And he goes to interview these kind of ancestral relations of these of slave owners. And their argument was, well, you know, they did give them a home. They did give them a job. They did give them, and it was like, wow, you have literally turned around the whole story to suit your family. So the North Star, which is the newspaper that Frederick Douglass published, their slogan was, "Right is of no sex, truth is of no color, God is the father of us all, and we all are brethren." That's quite a long slogan, but it's saying a lot. It was definitely a broadsheet, not a tabloid. The North Star was a 19th century anti-slavery newspaper published from the Talman Building in Rochester, New York by the abolitionist Frederick Douglass. The paper commenced publication in 1847. On this day, it ceased as the North Star in June 1851, when it merged with Liberty Party paper to form Frederick Douglass's paper. Now, at the time of the Civil War, it was Douglass's monthly. And he was inspired first to publish this newspaper after subscribing to The Liberator, which was a weekly newspaper published by William Lloyd Garrison. The Liberator was a newspaper established by Garrison and his supporters, founded on moral principles. The North Star title was actually a reference to directions given to runaway slaves trying to reach the northern states and Canada. Follow the North Star. Which ironically is a little bit like the story of the nativity, isn't it? You know? So it's very interesting to me that even back then, in 1846, that there were just as many people who knew that slavery was wrong. You know, slavery wasn't the civil rights movement. That wasn't the first time that people appeared who were like, this is bad, we need to change it. There were people who were progressive thinkers from the very earliest days who were just like, what is happening? You can't own other human beings. You can't put them to work. You can't beat them. You can't rape them. And you can't treat them like garbage just because you own them. It's very interesting to me that, you know, a lot of and this is why when I hear people claiming that critical race theory is taught in schools and it has to be stopped, I just think, hello, your desire to erase American history because it doesn't suit your politics is so offensive. And, again, going back to this idea of like, what is the difference in free speech and hate speech? It would be considered in any other country hate speech to say, I do not want critical race theory taught in school. Now, critical race theory is a very bad way to describe what is taught in school. What they teach in school is inclusivity, integration, and the history of the civil rights movement in America. Slavery. Critical race theory is something reserved for university campuses. That is something that is a construct that is analyzed and discussed in great depth. It is not what children in 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade are learning in school, CRT. And yet the right have kind of merged the two because they care nothing for detail or facts. Ten to 11. This is Backchannel, 10 to 11 right now. Let's have a little look at this. Carla's recommended to me this photograph. Oh, Frederick Douglass was a very handsome man. With a like a goatee and a grey silver fox afro. But it's like half, because the grey is like a skunk stripe right in the middle. Very distinguished. Very interesting. So, we've been talking about these there's so many different things to look at here, so many different associated subjects, and I'm very activated by all of them, I really am. But the anti-slavery newspaper, first published by the African-American abolitionist Frederick Douglass, using funds that Douglass earned during a speaking tour in Great Britain and Ireland, the North Star first developed into one of the most influential African-American anti-slavery publications of the pre-Civil War era. And the name of the newspaper paid homage to the fact that escaping slaves used the North Star in the night sky to guide them to freedom. And this is why, to bring it right back to modern day, when you've got these two racist Republican lawmakers fighting with each other about what they did and didn't say, about Ilhan Omar. Just going to look up that story because it's worth talking about, and something at the very beginning of the show I wanted to talk about. Do you remember? I said I want to talk about this kind of issue that we now have between these two far-right Republican lawmakers. And there's a story out today about Ilhan Omar. I think it was out yesterday. She actually played the death threat sound of her voicemail. On her voicemail, she actually played it back to people during a speech. I mean, the thinking, it just doesn't make any sense to me. Like the thinking or the lack of thought. It's probably lack of thought rather than thinking. But, 2 or 3 days ago, the US House was grappling with this fight between far-right Republican and a member of the Squad. I don't like the name Squad. Apparently they gave it to themselves, the three, ladies. They gave themselves that name. I think that's just playing into the hands of critics. But for Republicans, they say the battle marked yet another headache in which a member of its far-right flank attacked a prominent progressive lawmaker of color less than 2 weeks after House Democrats moved to censure. Hi, Davey. Thanks for joining us. Nice to know you're with us. Voted to censure and take away committee assignments from Representative Paul Gosar for posting an edited anime video depicting himself killing Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Democrats, meanwhile, seized on Boebert's remarks to cast the GOP as beholden to extremist elements and pressure House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy to condemn her actions. And at the same time, you got Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, another kind of extremist. And she appeared to endorse political violence in the wake of the January 6th attack on the Capitol, which she laughed all the way through. There's video of her when she was in hiding in Congress, laughing. She loved it, encouraged it. And Boebert, they're saying, is actually one of the people who took these insurrectionists on a tour of the Capitol building the day before the insurrection, so they knew how to break in and where to find the chamber. Deborah, thank you very much for being part of the show. Thank you for wishing me a great weekend. I shall. I'll be back on Monday at 9 o'clock. Stay with Backchannel for your pal Hal and Deborah's son next.